Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya.
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 Today we'll hear from Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 3, Chapter 5, Text 40. Dhata Yat Asmin Bhava. Not Bhava. Bhava. Different words. Isha. Jiva. Dhataryaras. I had it. Dhataryarasmin bhava isha jivas. Tapa. Trainabhihi. Trainabhihata. Na Sharma. Tapatrainabhita na Sharma. Atman Labhante Bhagavams Tavangri. Atman Labhante Bhagavans Tavangri. Chayam Savidyam Ata Ashrayema. Chayam Savidyam Ata Ashrayema. Dhataryarasmin bhava isha jivas. Tapatrainabhita na Sharma. Atman labhante bhagavans tavangri. Chayam savidyam ata ashrayema. Was that three? Others, please.
Dhataryarasmin bhava isha jivas. Tapa trayena bhata sharma. Atman labhante bhagavans tavangri. Chayam savidyam ata ashrayema. Dhataryarasmin bhava isha jivas. Tapatrayana bhata na Sharma. Atman labhante bhagavams tvam. Chayam savidyam ata ashrayema.
Dhata.
Data.
O Father. Yet. Because. Asmin. In this. Bhave. Material world. Isha. O Lord. Jivaha. The living entities. Tapa. Miseries. Trayena. By the three. Abhihata. Always embarrassed. Na. Never. Sharma. In happiness. Atman. Self. Labhante. Do gain.
Bhagavan,
O personality of Godhead,
O personality of Godhead,
Tava,
Tava,
your Amrichayam,
Amrichayam,
shade of your feet,
shade of your feet,
Savidyan,
Savyam,
full of knowledge,
full of knowledge,
Ataha,
Ataha,
obtain, Ashrayema,
Ashrayema,
shelter.
shelter.
Translation. O Father, O Lord, O personality of Godhead, the living entities in the material world can never have any happiness because they are overwhelmed by the three kinds of miseries. Therefore, they take shelter of the shade of your lotus feet, which are full of knowledge, and we also thus take shelter of them. Responsively, please. O Father,
O Father,
O Lord,
O Lord,
O personality of Godhead,
O personality of Godhead,
the living entities in the material world
the living entities in the material world
can never have any happiness
can never have any happiness
because they are overwhelmed by the three. Okay. Because they are overwhelmed
because they are overwhelmed
by the three kinds of miseries.
by three kinds of miseries.
Therefore, they take shelter
Therefore, they take shelter
of the shade of your lotus feet,
of the shade of your lotus feet,
which are full of knowledge,
which are full of knowledge,
and we also thus take shelter of them.
and we also take shelter of them.
Srila Prabhupada's purport. The way of devotional service is neither sentimental nor mundane. It is the path of reality by which the living entity can attain the transcendental happiness of being freed from the three kinds of material miseries. Miseries arising from the body and mind, from other living entities, and from natural disturbances. Everyone who is conditioned by material existence, whether he be a man or beast or demigod or bird, must suffer from adhyatmika, bodily or mental pains, adhibhautika pains, those offered by living creatures, and adhidaivika pains, those due to supernatural disturbances. This happiness is nothing but a hard struggle to get free from the miseries of conditional life. But there's only one way he can be rescued, and that is by accepting the shelter of the lotus feet of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. You see the pattern here? See that leitmotif? A little German lingo here. All right. It's a repeating theme throughout this chapter. Accepting the shelter. This is Maitreya's thing. Accepting the shelter of the lotus feet of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. The argument that unless one has proper knowledge, one cannot be freed from the material miseries is undoubtedly true. But because the lotus feet of the Lord are full of transcendental knowledge, acceptance of his lotus feet completes that necessity. We've already discussed this point in the first canto. Vasudeve Bhagavati Bhakti Yoga Prayojita Janayatya Shivairagyam Jnanam Chayadahaitukam. There's no want of knowledge in the devotional service of Vasudeva, the personality of Godhead. He, the Lord, personally takes charge of dissipating the darkness of ignorance from the heart of a devotee. He confirms this in the Bhagavad Gita, Tesham satata yuktanam vajatam priti purvakam dadami buddhi yogam tam yena mamupayanti te. Empiric philosophical speculation cannot give one relief from the threefold miseries of material existence. Simply to endeavor for knowledge without devoting oneself to the Lord is a waste of valuable time. Om Ajnanatimirandasya Jnananjana Shalakaya Chakshurumilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. Mukam Karoti Vachalam Pangum Lankayate Girim Jakrapatamaham Vande Shri Gurum Dinataranam Shri Chaitanya Manobhishtam Sthapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Kadamayam Dadati Swapadantikam Vansha Kalpatarubhyascha Kripa Sindho Bhevacha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Dhata Yarasmin Bhava Isha Jivasthapatrayena Vihatana Sharma Atman Lavante Bhagavan Stavan Chayam Savidyam Ata Ashrayema. O Father, O Lord, O Personality of Godhead, the living entities in the material world can never have any happiness because they are overwhelmed by the three kinds of miseries. Therefore they take shelter of the shade of your lotus feet, which are full of knowledge, and we thus take shelter of Him. So the focus, actually two sides to the focus. There's a Swarupa Lakshanam and a Tatastha Lakshanam. There's an essential focus and then there's a peripheral focus. The essential focus is taking shelter of the Lord's lotus feet. The marginal and peripheral focus might be the threefold miseries. And this is where we find this phrase. Of course, we're more familiar with it from Srila Sanatana Goswami's inquiries when he met with Lord Chaitanya. This is Kayami Kenyamai Ja Tapatrai. Ihana Hijani Kemone Hitahoy. He says, who am I? Who am I? Why do the threefold miseries always give me trouble? If I do not know this, how can I be benefited? How can I be happy? How is it possible to be happy if I don't even know who I am? We used to like to tell the stories of the preaching programs that we would have at the state hospital in Kaneohe. There were a few points that we would make. I remember Sundar would, two big points, you'd always say, there's somebody in there who thinks he's President Kennedy. I don't think that we actually met someone who thought he was President Kennedy, but it's kind of a trope, right? It's sort of a cliche that we use, that if you don't know who you are, this is a big problem. If you misidentify who you are. I mean, if I think I'm Marilyn Monroe, how in the world am I going to be happy here, living at the Hare Krishna temple in the Nirvana Valley? There's no men to fall all over me, and I'm just, it's going to drive me crazy. No paparazzi taking pictures, no, ventilation grates for me to walk over and act all coy. I can't be happy here. It's just not going to happen. So in the verse, the demigods are praying to the Lord that those of us here in the material world, in Bhava is material existence. I always found this fellow's name, Bhavananda, really interesting. Devotees have some interesting names. It's not Bhavananda, it's Bhavananda. I haven't figured that out yet. Of course, it's just existing is a kind of happiness and understanding that we exist. So those of us stuck here in this bhava, in this material existence, says here we can never have any happiness. What do you mean we can't have any happiness? I was happy the other day when we had the birthday cake and ice cream, well, some of the ice cream. Some of the other ice cream, we were enjoying great happiness for a moment. Then you just saw the faces change around the room. It's like, okay. So, And Krishna acknowledges in the Bhagavad Gita that there's a kind of happiness in the material. They're pleasure. You know, it's different kinds of enjoyment. There's enjoyment in the mode of ignorance, enjoyment in the mode of passion, and enjoyment in the mode of goodness. But real happiness, when we talk about happiness in a philosophical sense, we're actually talking about well-being. When the founders of the United States wrote the Declaration of Independence, Jefferson finished it off in the final draft saying that every human being has an inherent right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And when he was talking about happiness there, he wasn't talking about pleasure. He wasn't talking about quadruple nuclear chocolate ice cream or something like that. He wasn't talking about the whee on a roller coaster or any of this stuff. What was I thinking? What did I say? Is it getting barreled? Those are all different kinds of pleasure. But happiness, when we're talking in a philosophical sense, and this was driven home to me by a philosopher who I heard discuss the kind of the spiritual background to the founding of the United States of America. A philosopher whose name I just remembered. It didn't come to me as I was guessing yesterday when I was trying to fall asleep. But it came to me just at this moment, a gentleman named Jacob Needleman. And I can't remember what the title of the book was, but he was talking about this pursuit of happiness business, and he said, this means well-being. It doesn't mean fleeting pleasures, because they are all fleeting pleasures. You know, you have that intensely chocolate ice cream on your tongue, and it's great for however long it sits on your tongue, and then there's that period afterwards. Of course, as devotees, our habit is to go rinse our mouth, but if you've just had some really good Shrikant or some really good chocolate brownies or something like that, you don't want to rinse your mouth right away, because you know that pleasure is it's fading now, and it's going to be gone in a couple of minutes. But if I go in and rinse my mouth out, it's gone like that, and all I have is some memory, maybe, of what it was like to enjoy that. So that's not what we're talking about when we say we can't have any happiness, we can't have any well-being, because it's constantly under threat by these three kinds of miseries. So this is where we first find this phrase, tapatraya. Trapatrayena bhita na sharma. No happiness, no sharma. Nice Brahmin name, right? Sharma. Because in the mode of goodness, there's a certain there's actually kind of a deeper sense of happiness, a deeper happiness. So tapatrayena bhita na sharma. We can't have any real happiness because we're constantly bombarded by these three kinds of miseries. And this is an easy place for us to talk about it. Living in Hawaii, we're not deeply into the tropical zone, so it's just nice and warm most of the time here. That's all. It doesn't get super hot. I live in Costa Rica, which is like 10 degrees closer to the equator. And it's more likely to be in the 90s in the afternoon there than in the 80s. And that's a little hot. So, but here, not so bad. Not too hot, not too cold. Pretty much just right. So, it's real easy for us to talk about that. What is it, Srila Prabhupada supposed to have said that there is no happiness in the material world, but if there were, you would find it here in Hawaii. So there is a greater sense of well-being, and I remember realizing fairly early on that this was my understanding. Seems to me like the perfect place for Krishna consciousness, because it doesn't get too hot, doesn't get too cold. We don't have to worry about layers and layers of clothes. Bless you. In the winter, and whether we're able to heat our homes or anything like that. We don't have to worry about getting too hot, although my little hut might have been designed better to maybe to catch the trades better or something like that. It gets around 90 degrees in the afternoon sometimes, and a little uncomfortable, but not terrible, even in there. And before we had all the high-rise buildings, office buildings around Honolulu were generally built to take advantage of the trade wind. So you just keep the windows open, and except maybe when they've got Kona weather or something. It's generally going to be fairly comfortable in your office. I remember the office that I worked in when I was in the Navy wasn't air conditioned. And it was warm in the afternoons, especially in the summer, but not terrible. And if we do it right, we have a 365-day growing season. You can always have different fruits and vegetables according to the season. Some things we can have, and some things we can just have year round. So not so bad. So my idea early on was, it seems to me like this is the best place for becoming Krishna conscious. And I remember being astounded when later devotees would regularly visit from the mainland, and they would say, "Oh, it's too bad you have to live here, because you have to suffer to become Krishna conscious, and there's no suffering here." And I would just say, wait a moment. I have a problem with that on 2 counts. First of all, you better give me chapter and verse on if you don't suffer, you can't become Krishna conscious. You can't just say something like that. You can't make stuff up. And the second thing is, no suffering here? Are you kidding me? Are you kidding me? I've had staph infections. I've had bronchitis like nothing, like nowhere else before. Damn near broke my neck body surfing at Sandy Beach, making a tourist mistake after having been going there regularly for 7 years. Let's see, what else? Fights with my wife, not getting along sometimes with other people in the temple. I mean, we were young men, testosterone coming out of our ears, false ego coming out of every pore of our body, constantly clashing with each other over who was more Krishna conscious, who was the better kartal player, whatever. Who could pronounce, Bhagavad Gita chapter 7 verse 14 better, all just crazy stuff. What do you mean no suffering? And then there's my mind. Oh, geez Louise. And then sometimes we have hurricanes come and give us more than a few good days of rain. That does happen. They come and everybody gets excited, and everybody goes down to Lowe's and Home Depot and fills their pickup trucks and SUVs up with water, plywood, canned food, you name it. Toilet paper. And and the hurricane's barreling down, ready to just clobber the Big Island and rip through Maui and Oahu and just completely devastate Hawaii. And we get some rain. I remember a few years ago, it must have been August of 2013, because it was just a year after I accepted sannyas. And I was visiting the Big Island. Hadn't been there for 6 years. And we had this big program planned. Actually, this big program planned for this one day at our house, this house that my wife now owns, that she was renting to some other devotees, still is. And we were going to have this program with Bhagawatam Maharaj and me at this house. And we were really worried because here was this really big hurricane coming. And we just thought, oh my God, what are we going to do with all the kids if they have to be, it's only it's less than 1,100 square feet inside the house. And that's like 3 bedrooms and 2 bathrooms, probably more than half of that. So not a bad sized living room, but You know, if you've got 20, 25 kids running around, you know, how do you have Krishna Katha and Kirtan? So everybody's just like, oh my God, what are we going to do? We got some rain in the morning. By mid-morning, before the program started, the sun was starting to come out. And then, later in the day when we got on Facebook, we saw there was this meme. I can't remember the name of the hurricane now. You know, Hurricane Ingrid or whatever. And there was a picture of somebody's plastic lawn chair knocked over. Hurricane Ingrid will we will persist, you know, because we're island strong or something like that. You know, we got a little rain. And that's how it often happens, although every once in a while you get someone like Iniki who comes through and just rips the place apart. So there's that too. And then there are combinations, going out on door-to-door, some kirtan with the guy in the ashram that you just can't get along with. And the people in the neighborhood are giving you a hard time, and then it's raining. And you want to take the stack of Back to Godheads and put it over your head to protect yourself from the rain, but you know you got to put it under your cloth and protect the Back to Godheads with your body. And then you have to go to the bathroom. Right? You're out going door to door for 3 hours, and then you have to go to the bathroom. So all these different things assaulting us. How can there be any sense of well-being in this world? So Srila Prabhupada discusses this. And we've been discussing on Tuesday evenings how Krishna consciousness, how bhakti actually gives us relief from material distress. And we've been discussing how it does that. There's different stages of karmic reactions, sinful reactions that we encounter. You know, so you've got the fully fructified, you've got the about to fructify, you've got lying in seed, and then you've got the very root of our suffering, which is avidya, ignorance. So that's also addressed here in this verse and in this purport. Srila Prabhupada points to this in his purport. He alludes to the verses. See, there was some happiness welling up because I thought that I had beat Lalit Krishna to the punch, but he wasn't here, which is why I was the first to say. So there was this happiness welling up, and then all of a sudden when I saw I wasn't here, it just like, that's how temporary happiness, so-called happiness in the material world is. We have a thing, Lalit Krishna and I. But as soon as the door starts to open, he yells out, Shri Shri Pancha Tattva Ki Jai, and sometimes I beat him to the punch. Oh. So he alludes to these verses, actually refers to these verses in the second chapter of the Bhagavatam, Vasudevi Bhagavati Bhakti Yoga Prayojita. So we can take a look at this business of the root of our suffering being ignorance, as we find it discussed in the context of bhakti relieving us of the suffering because of the consequences of our past activities. First in the Nectar of Devotion, and then as we find it in commentary, I think Jiva Goswami's commentary on this section of the Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu. So Srila Prabhupada writes in the Nectar of Devotion, this tight knot of false ego is due to ignorance. And it's that false, he's explaining that it's the false ego that is responsible for these 4 different stages of suffering. As long as one is ignorant about his identity, he's sure to act wrongly and thereby become entangled in material contamination. The ignorance of factual knowledge can also be dissipated by Krishna consciousness, as it is confirmed in the Padma Purana as follows. Pure devotional service in Krishna consciousness is the highest enlightenment. And when such enlightenment is there, it is just like a blazing forest fire, killing all the inauspicious snakes of desire. So, and then he goes on to explain that when there's a forest fire, naturally it'll kill all the creatures in the forest, including even the snakes that fly that crawl on the ground. So he says Krishna consciousness creates such a spiritual conflagration that it can kill even the snakes of desire. And the desire that drives us to act in this world is born of ignorance of who we actually are. So in the Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu, we see this. This is Srila Rupa Goswami citing a verse from the 4th canto of the Bhagavatam. This is the Vidyaharatvam Yata Chaturte. So he says is with regard to taking away avidya, ignorance, which is the root cause of our suffering. It's from ignorance that these desires are born, and these desires cause us to act. The devotees, by actions of service to the toes of the lotus feet of the Lord. Here again. Now this is real taking shelter, actual taking shelter of the lotus feet of the Lord, rendering service to his lotus feet. Can very easily overcome the knot of ignorance, carrying unlimited impressions of karma, tied tightly by action. I saw I was participating in a discussion with some devotees the other day, and these impressions, the Sanskrit word for these impressions in the subtle body is samskar. And the devotee who was talking about this was talking about some scars, and he says, yeah, some scars. They leave some scars, right? I liked that. Because this is very difficult, the empty-minded non-devotees, the jnanis and yogis, although trying to stop the flow of sense activities cannot do so, therefore you are advised to engage in the devotional service of Krishna, the son of Vasudeva. And then Srila Jiva Goswami explains this, and you'll see where I'm going here in just a minute. Taking up the topic of Naishtiki Bhakti's ability to destroy avidya. So when we were discussing this, this is something that we that kind of came close to the surface in our discussion of how bhakti relieves us, it affords us relief from material distress, that this is something that appears during the course of sadhana bhakti, but it becomes actually noticeable in the stage of Naishtiki bhakti, in the stage of nishtha, after we've cleared away a good deal of the false values that impede our progress in bhakti. So Naishtiki, the topic of Naishtiki's bhakti, ability to destroy avidya, the author illustrates this with 2 verses. These 2 verses from the 4th canto. And he says, Rikta Mataya means a person's with empty minds. Back in the 80s or 90s, they had this image in popular culture of the bhakti. The chick who, was just very, very close to kind of figuring out rudimentary things. So that's what empty-minded made me think of, that kind of empty-headed, kind of the blonde and stereotype, something that wasn't tolerated around my household because I had 2 really smart blonde daughters. Means their minds are devoid of meditation on the Lord. Adanam means shelter. Using the process of hearing, To represent all the devotional processes, Sutta gives the progression in destroying avidya, or the knot in the heart, in the following verses. Shrimvatam svakatha Krishna punya shravana kirtana hridyam tastavaya bhadrani vidhunoti subrat satani nashta praishva bhadreshu nityam bhagavata sevaya bhagavatirtam shloke bhakti bhavati naishtaki tada rajastamo bhava kamalo padayaschaye cheta etayaranavitam stittam sattve prasiddhiti evam prasanna manaso bhagavat bhakti yogataha Bhagavat Tattva Vijnana Mukta Samgasya Jayate Vidya Vidyate Hridaya Grantis. Now we've gotten to that knot in the heart. This is the false ego. This is the ignorance. Vidyate Hridaya Grantis Chityante Sarva Samshaya Kshiyate Chasya Karmani Drishta Evat Manishvare. So these are verses a little later in the second chapter. And these verses, starting with the 17th verse to 21st verse, these describe the 9, in these verses we see the 9 stages of bhakti that Srila Rupa Goswami discusses toward the end of the first part of the Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu, Ada Shratata Dasada Sangha Tabhajana Kriya Tanartha Nivritti, etc. So, the translations of these verses: Sri Krishna, the personality of Godhead, who is Paramatma, who is the Paramatma in everyone's heart, and the benefactor of the truthful devotee, cleanses desire for material enjoyment from the heart of the devotee, who has developed the urge to hear his messages, which are in themselves virtuous when properly heard and chanted. So that's kind of the nut, the core here of what's being discussed, is that it's Krishna and his Swarupa Shakti who actually cleanse these things from the devotees' hearts, these sinful desires, which is the basis of our suffering in this world. And how we take shelter of those lotus feet is by offering heartfelt service to the lotus feet of Krishna. And who do we find situated at Krishna's lotus feet? I mentioned this yesterday. Devotees. So for serving Krishna's lotus feet, it's also natural to serve those who are situated at Krishna's lotus feet, serving the devotees. Nityam Bhagavata Sevaya, right? That's kind of our main practice. Always serving the Bhagavat. And I think it's Vrindavan Das Thakur points out in Chaitanya Bhagavat that there are 2 kinds of Bhagavats implied in this verse. There's the Grantha Bhagavat and then there's the Vaishnava Bhagavat. And that often reminds me of one of my favorite Rumi poems, where he says, ask the Quran about the meaning of the Quran. And he talks about, it'll take too much time to find it, but he talks about, if you want to know the meaning of the Quran, you have to go to the Quran itself. Or, he says, that person who has, I'm paraphrasing here, he doesn't exactly use the same language we use, even in the translation, that person who has offered his ego, has burned up his ego in sacrifice to the Quran, and therefore has become the same essence of the Quran, because he says, you can, if you want to experience what a rose is, you can either smell a rose or you can smell the essential oil taken from the rose. As you like, he says, Rumi says, as you like. Because, that essential oil, that's the rose boiled down, right? Essentially, sorry. So that's actually what the Bhagavatam tells us, to take shelter of the Lord's lotus feet, and who we find there at the lotus feet of the Lord are his devotees. And as someone pointed out the other day, Krishna says somewhere that someone who says they're my devotees, not my devotee, but someone who says they're a devotee of my devotees, that's my devotee.
Alexander.
Was it Alexander?
Yeah.
Yes, thank you. Yeah, an excellent point. And very much to the point of the verses that we are looking at now. I'm going to stop and hope that any questions or comments might be brief. That's not to say there shouldn't be any. Thank you.
So like it says that the shade, taking shelter of the shade of your lotus feet. You explained, taking out, that also means taking shelter of the devotees of the Lord, or serving the devotees of the Lord. But does it also mean literally, in the sense that, in the practical sense, how do you understand that? Because this thing is like common for the Bhagavatam, taking shelter of the lotus feet, or serving the lotus feet of the Lord, which means literally serving in the sense like you have your deity and you serve the lotus feet of the Lord.
That's one way. That's one way to say it. It's a figure of speech. It means take a lower position. And it means serving the Lord's purposes. Srila Prabhupada points that out in many places. That serving the Lord means to serve his mission. And so if we want to see service to the lotus feet of the Lord, we can simply examine the life of His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada. If we were to do so, I think we would find it strikingly wonderful. Chamatkar. Just Krishnadas Kaviraj says, Shri Krishna Chaitanya Daya Koraha Vichar Vichar Korile Chitte Have Chamatkar. That if you're really attached to reason and logic, then apply them to this one thing, Lord Chaitanya's mercy. Shri Krishna Chaitanya Daya Koraha Vichar. You're really into discrimination? Cool. Use it to check this out. Why? Because if I think you do, you find it strikingly wonderful that he gave prema even to people like Jagai and Madhai. So Srila Prabhupada, I wrote an essay many years ago playing on this. Actually, I think I first did it and maybe wrote it. I thought about it for many, many years, and then became bold enough to write it in a Vyasa Puja offering maybe sometime in the 80s. Srila Prabhupada Doya Koraho Vichar. Vichar Korile Chitte Pave Chamaka. So if we want to understand what it means to take shelter, it means to accept the Lord's mercy. And when we become rich with something, when we become wealthy, the best thing to do with that is to share it. I mean, even whatever you think of them. And their lives are certainly a mess now in so many ways that we've only begun to find out about. Bill and Melinda Gates. Say what you like about them, but they've got this foundation funded by $50 billion. I don't even know what that means, $50 billion. And they just added another $15 billion to that foundation's funding to do what they consider to be good for the world. So that's how you spend wealth. If you hoard it, then you become terribly unhappy, and we also have very prominent examples of that, even in our popular culture. So Srila Prabhupada showed us how to serve the lotus feet of the Lord, to accept the order of the spiritual master very seriously. I mean, it wasn't even an order for, like you must do this, or do or die, or something like that. Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur, when he met him with a group of other young men, he said, "You're all intelligent, educated young men, so you should take this movement of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu seriously and share it with the rest of the world." And Srila Prabhupada objected. But we're we're a colonized nation. Who's going to take us seriously? First, we have to get independence. Then maybe we can teach what Lord Chaitanya taught. And Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur, as we know, shot him down and told him, he said, no, this is actually the essential thing. This is why people are suffering. This can't wait for that. So Srila Prabhupada took that seriously. And then later, at the end of their association, he wrote Srila Saraswati Thakur a couple of weeks before his passing and said, I feel unfortunate because so many of my godbrothers, they're able to live in the mutts, serve the mission full time, but I have all my family and business responsibilities. Is there a little something I can do to feel like I'm part of the mission? And Srila Saraswati Thakur said pretty much the same thing as he did at their first meeting. He says, you're an intelligent, educated man, you're good with English, so share Lord Chaitanya's teachings with people, with the English-speaking people. It'll be good for them and for you. And so that was a suggestion. He was saying, I think it would be good if you could do this. There was a suggestion. Srila Prabhupada, as one of his godbrother's disciples, wrote in a pranam mantra for Srila Prabhupada. He took that on his head like an order. And became empowered to spread Lord Chaitanya's teachings first to the West and then bring them back to the East. Pretty cool. Huh? Is that okay? Anything else?
I was just going to say about devotional service, it's selfless service, where the objective is just to serve the object of your love. But we also understand that if you don't take care of yourself, right, then you're not in a position to be able to serve. So there is some need for, what they call self-care.
Mm-hmm.
But pure devotional service is supposed to be selfless. So how do we engage in selfless service, understanding also that we do need to practice some self-care? How do you balance or?
I'm not my car either.
Yeah.
But every 3 months or 5 months, I guess, depending on what kind of oil you get, I'm going to take it for an oil change.
Right.
Every Saturday, I'm going to check the level of the oil. That's how you remember to do it. This is something I do on Saturday mornings. And a couple times a month, when I pull into a gas station, I'm going to whip out my pressure gauge and check the air pressure on my tires. And I'm going to get the car lubed every so often. This is a lesson. These are lessons that I learned from my dad. Every Saturday morning, when I wanted to go out and mess around with my friends, my dad had me under the car, and I found out where all the joints were for lubing, for changing the grease in the joints of my 1955 Hillman Minx. Oh, and then his 1963 Mercedes-Benz. And my mom's Buick. So, I got to do all that stuff because he wanted to impress on me the importance of taking care of that instrument that we use for our purposes. So we have a body. That's kind of an extended self. It's something that we have and we identify with, if we're honest, to some extent. So we take care of it. We get an oil change every once in a while. We feed it when it needs to be fed. We rest it when it needs to be rested. We bathe it when it needs to be bathed. And if something's going really out of whack, we go to the body mechanic. We go to the doctor and try to see if we can figure out what it is that's causing the trouble that's getting in the way of my car. When the car gets way out of whack and needs a tune-up, you go to the mechanic, and the mechanic says, I was going to say you need your points and distributor cap changed. I don't know if they have that kind of thing anymore. I look under the hood of a car and I don't understand anything anymore. And your spark plugs need to be changed, or they at least need to be cleaned and the gaps adjusted and all that kind of stuff. That's stuff you got to do. So in order to serve effectively, as you know, to the extent that we're not able to engage this body beyond some sort of natural limits, we have to indulge it. So we need friendship, we need rest, we need exercise, we need food, we need some recreation. Krishna says in Bhagavad Gita that someone who's in the mode of goodness doesn't overindulge or underindulge in their spiritual practice and in sleeping, eating, and recreation. So, we used to have to recite this verse whenever we went to the beach in Costa Rica. Our Swami would say, "Okay, what's our Bhagavad Gita verse today?" as we're heading down the road toward the coast. And we had to recite the verse escapes me at the moment. Nidra Hara.
One question says to serve the devotees or the devotees, and there's many different level of devotees, and there's different stages, and how do you do